Yo, hell yeah. Wyatt begins in like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Yo, welcome to Wyatt, and I'm your host, Wyatt O'Brien Evans. Grrr, woof, goddammit, woof, 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 woof. Hi to all my YouTubers out there. If you like what you hear, if you like what you see, just click that subscribe button at the bottom of your screen. Just click it. Click it. Click it. I loves to click it. Yeah. Hi. Today's Wyatt serves up a huge and essential slice, y'all, of LGBTQ plus history with Mr. Donald M. Bell. Mr. Bell is that renowned LGBTQ plus and women's activist. He's also a valued resource on aging, particularly in the LGBTQ community. So, you ready? Because I am. So, without further ado, Wyatt welcomes Mr. Donald M. Bell. Talk at me. How the hell are you?
I'm fine and like to greet your audience from the heartland here in Chicago.
I love it. Chi-Town, my brother. Listen, Mr. Bell, thanks for dropping by Wyatt. Now, let me tell you something. I had to do that. I want to be... it's cathartic. What could I say?
That's the part where you scare an old man, all right?
There you go. Look, I say that because I want to be just like you when I grow up. And let me tell the audience, let me give them your resume here. Number one, you are a retired higher education administration student affairs professional. You're also this renowned LGBTQ plus and women's activists. Along with that, my brother, you are a valued and recognized resource and speaker in the area of aging, particularly LGBTQ plus aging. And you're quite the YouTube star because you're an integral part of LGBTQ Nation's Authentic Voices of Pride, that project. And LGBTQ Nation is one of the LGBTQ community's most followed news source. So let's start off by telling us how you got involved in the project and what has its impact been thus far.
Well, I got involved in this project because, as has always been the case throughout my life, I valued the education and the upbringing that my parents gave me, telling me that no matter what the oppression is, you must always find your voice and use your voice. And so it's not about me being a singular personality. I'm just a regular guy, just like everybody else. But when we find our voices and collectively use them, we can change the world.
Absolutely. I mean, I couldn't have said that any better, Donald. Now, before we do a deep dive into your stellar career as an activist and an expert on aging, let us learn about your backstory because inquiring minds want to know. So let's travel through the quarters of time to find out all about you. Where were you born and raised?
Okay, well, we're going back to the Jurassic period now. And I was born and raised in Chicago. I'm a third-generation native Chicagoan.
Wow.
My family arrived in the North in the 1890s, shortly after the World's Columbian Exposition.
Wow.
So we are old-timers in the community. I'm a South Sider, and those of you who know Chicago know that it's big enough that it has three distinct regions: the North Side, the West Side, and the South Side. And those of you who are really smart know the South Side is the best side. So that's where I'm from.
Okay, all right. Now, Donald, Mr. Bill, I always like to ask my special guest this question because it really gives a window into who you are now as an adult. So here it is. What was Donald like as a little boy, a little nipper? Give us three qualities, characteristics that, best defined you.
Well, I responded to my environment. So I was loving, I was curious, and always searching.
Fascinating, as Mr. Spock from Star Trek would say, fascinating. Okay, let me ask you, what were you most curious about, and what were you searching for?
Well, I was searching for all of the dimensions of life. I wanted to know what life was about. I wanted to know why I was here and what I could do. And just as you see in the movie The Lion King, our ancestral cultural values came out in the way that I was raised. My parents and my grandpa saying, behold, the only thing greater than yourself, of course, is all of creation. Uh-huh. And they began what African American parents always have to do. On one hand, to reassure the child that that child has limited potential. And then, unfortunately, they have to begin the process of telling you how you have to alter that to survive.
Got it. You know what? You were sounding a little bit like James Earl Jones there. Anyway.
Yeah, it was my Mufasa moment.
I was trying to give you a compliment. You know what I mean? Anyway, I'm messing with you.
Well, I'm honored to be in the same sentence with his name, so thank you.
Yeah, yes, indeed. Okay, now, when you were six years old in 1955, the body of Emmett Till was returned to Chicago. So, Donald, what do you remember about it, and how did it impact you?
Okay. The memories have been with me all of my life. And for this 6-year-old little boy, this was a significant experience. But what I saw from a child's point of view was that all of my grown-ups, the very structures that kept me safe, were upset. Everybody. This was the first time that I saw men cry in public. And so the
wow.
magnitude of this event impacted me, and the sense of urgency and the issues of security were embodied in me, because when your grown-ups are upset, then your world is upset, because your grown-ups are the structure of your world when you're a small child. And
Sure.
the feeling reverberated throughout the community. And I knew that something horrible had gone on. And what that was, and what what resides with me, what the residual of that experience is that I was learning for the first time in my life the danger of being born in black skin. The fact that although Till was a child, he was older than I was, but this happened to him because he had skin like mine. Gave me a foreboding that this was going to be an issue my entire life, and the issue was going to be the issue of survival.
Wow. That is profound. Okay, let's fast forward a bit to the turbulent 1960s. Now, man, look, throughout our conversation, I'm going to relate to our audience some of your excellent, poignant quotes. I mean, they really are, wow, they're something else. And then I want you to unpack them. So you've stated, and I quote, "The basis for my activism comes from my own personal experience. Activism is a means of survival. If we do not take a stand, if we do not have a moral position that we are willing to act upon, then we are subject to extinction." End quote. Let's dig into that.
Okay. Well, let me say this. There are very important basic lessons that I was given, and I cannot overstate the wonderful situation that I was born into, with two fantastic parents and a grandfather who was like the second coming to me. And the values that they passed along to me were absolutely essential. And they gave me my start. They gave me my motivation and my sense of potential, while giving me the realities with which I would have to engage for my entire life. And I know, as we all knew, that there's only one humanity, that people are all the same, but we also knew that that was not universally accepted. And so survival was the issue. I see African American people as a survivalist people. We have been assaulted, our bodies, our minds, our culture, from the time that we were brought to this continent. And that has been supported not only culturally, but institutionally. The very elements of our society, of our nation, put us in a special status. And none of it supported the normal human developments and associations of the general world culture. And to survive that, we had to be intentional in our living. And so my living has been intentional. I'm 73 years old. I'm a Black man. I have not had an arrest experience or a booking experience, not because I'm better than anyone else, but because it was intentional, because I was taught that the system is set up for that to happen. And things that we experience now, like the school to prison pipeline, the driving while Black experience, all of those things are real, and you have to learn how to negotiate your way through them or around them. When I'm stopped by the police, when I'm having a DWB, as we call it, I know that I don't have the same citizenship rights as white people. I'm not going to say, "Officer, what's going on? Why are you bothering me?" I'm going to put my hands on the wheel where they can be seen. All of my citizenship rights go right out the window when that happens. The motivation is to survive. I have got to live through that experience, and it is a life and death situation. And if people don't understand that about Black people and the police, then they aren't listening. The object is to survive. And we see every day where that doesn't happen. But I learned that very early.
Donald, that's powerful. It's so on point. It's just absolutely true. You've also said that in the 1960s, it was unusual to hear the word homosexual. And you've stated, and I quote, another one of your great quotes, "I had to come to the point in my own head where I valued myself enough to not think that being Negro was wrong, so that I could be who I was and I'd be okay." And you further added, "And it occurred to me that this gay thing was the same thing. The juxtaposition of those two identities have always counterbalanced each other." When I had problems with one, I'd get advice from the other. That's what has brought me to where I am today, end quote. Let's dig into that because that says a lot.
Yes. Well, basically, my experience was this. Like everyone in my generation, I was raised in a heteronormative society and followed heteronormative behaviors. There were no pride flags, celebrations, SGAs in school, advocacy agencies that we could approach or whatever. Yeah, we knew we were different, but we didn't know what that difference was. We didn't have the language to describe it. We didn't have anything that could help us come to recognition of what issues around sexual orientation and gender identity were. All we had was an awareness that somehow this conversation was verboten, and we were at great risk if we were to reach out and try to discuss these things. Now, homosexual was a technical term, and it's actually a term that's only about 150 years old. But that would come every once in a while through the media or someplace, and there was always a sense that this was something bad. And so I, like many other people of my age, wanted to get information on this thing. And there was only one place where I could go, and that was to our town library, because even though my high school had 2 libraries and was huge, there were not the resources there to find that out. So going to the town library, going to the Webster's Unabridged Dictionary, which we used to be printed it was about 2,000 pages long, and it sat open on what looked like an altar in the reference room. I looked up the word homosexual and got its meaning, but I also noticed that particular page was heavily smudged. And so I wasn't the only person who'd ever looked up that word. Obviously, a lot of people did, but we had no way of connecting to each other. Each of us was anonymous, always. I went further and looked in the Encyclopedia Britannica, which used to be printed in volumes, somewhere around 24 volumes, with yearly updates, and looked at the word homosexual there. And the page was earmarked. It had been bent down. And again, a lot of smudges and all. And I'm like, there's a lot of curiosity around this homosexuality thing. But again, no people to connect it to. And so that was where we start off. And then as we get older and older, we are dealing with identity within ourselves, and we're hearing more and more. And of course, it wasn't until I got to college that I got a true understanding of what my sense of differentness was. When I was a sophomore in college, I was also an orientation leader, and I went back to campus early, and I met my resident advisor. This guy opens the door, and I have a Walt Disney, I call it a Walt Disney experience, where there's music floating in the air, there's butterflies, there's birds, all this kind of stuff, And now what I have to let the audience know is at this time, when I'm a sophomore in college, I have already dated girls all my life, gone through all of those steps, going steady and the whole thing. And I was, in fact, engaged to be married at that point, because she and I had gone to different universities, and we both had extremely challenging first years. And we got engaged after our first year with the promise that we would go back to our campuses one more time, and if we had difficulty the second year, then we would get married between second year and third year, and one of us would transfer to the other's campus, and we'd go through life together to get through this thing together. And
Ah.
And I loved her as I loved all the girls with who I dated or had relationships or whatever. Yes, I loved her. But this experience, this in the moment experience of seeing this particular man just was overwhelming. But I knew instantly what it was. And so everything that I'd learned about homosexual, everything that I'd learned about gay, became real to me. And so I went back to my room, and I had a 3 or 4 hour, what we call in the hood, come to Jesus moment, because I was like, oh my God, what is this? And I said, during the course of this time, I prayed, I cried, I was very upset, but I was having to process what was going on. And I said to God, isn't being Black enough? Do I have to be gay too? And I thought through it. And then this was my line of reasoning, Wyatt. I knew as a Black man that I had to find in myself the resilience to stand up against what the world was telling me about how valueless I was because I was Black. And then I figured, I have to do the same thing too about being gay. I have to find a place in myself where I'm not apologetic and that I can live a reasonable and sane and moral life as a gay person too. And so from that time on, I've used my experience in both oppressions to reinforce one another. And that's how that came about. But we have to get beyond, those of us who are part of any marginalized communities, we have to get beyond what the general society is telling us about our worth and find values in ourselves, because none of us gets to choose. There was no line that I stood in that says, hey, do you want to be Black? Come sign up here. Do you want to be gay? Hey, come on, sign up here. That didn't happen. We are born as we are born. And our challenge is to appreciate where we're born. It's for a reason, it's for a purpose, and it is of no less value than if we were born as part of the straight, white, Christianist male elite. All of the people who set the cultural values. We are no less valuable than they are. And it doesn't matter what anyone else says. You've got to believe it for yourself.
Absolutely. And this brings to mind something I'm going to share with everybody. Speaking of the word homosexual, in the mid 60s, I think it was 1966, maybe 67, Mike Wallace, CBS News, did this special, which was very controversial at the time, called The Homosexuals. And everybody should look at that because it's a snapshot into what people really thought about gay men and women in the 60s. And you can find it on YouTube. And basically, it's like this documentary. Mike Wallace interviews gay people, so-called experts. And the bottom line is the program is stating, being gay, being lesbian is a mental illness. And later on, Wallace caught a lot of flack, and he admitted that it was a horrible thing to do. So people go to YouTube, go see The Homosexuals. It's real, it's disturbing, and it's eye-opening. So I just wanted to bring that out.
I'm glad that you mentioned that, Wyatt, because of this. That marks a moment in history. And the thing that we have to learn about history is that there's the event that happens, but then we have to understand the context of the times in which that happened. With all of the flaws in Mike Wallace's presentation, it was one of the few times when the issue of sexual orientation was introduced into the popular culture and into the language of the time. We were not mentioned Just like it was significant when the Supremes and the Temptations were on the Ed Sullivan Show, and all over our neighborhoods, we were calling people and say, "Hey, colored people on TV," and we had house parties to watch when they were on, because it was the only time that we were mentioned in the popular culture. And so this Mike Wallace thing was the same thing for the LGBT community. It was the only time that we were mentioned. And so it's not accurate in what it says about us, but at least it made us part of the public conversation for a time. And that is the difference between people who grew up in my generation versus what happens now. And what happens now is a result of the work that we did to get us to this place. So, and I can say as a member
thank
of
you for that.
The first out-aging generation of LGBT elders, or the Stonewall generation, as some of us called us, we are the people who have lived the entire arc of not only the great civil rights movement, but the civil rights movement of the LGBT community, for the women's community, for reviving labor and all of that kind of stuff, the anti-war movement. We lived through those movements and changed society, advocated for change, brought about change, not only in law, but in culture. And so it's a completely different world today. And to understand us, and it's not about necessarily honoring us, because we too stand on the shoulders of our predecessors. It's just about understanding where we were then and where we are now, so that we can continue on with where we need to go in the future. So that's very important.
Absolutely. Donald, speaking of Stonewall, which was rather the series of spontaneous, violent confrontations that began in the early hours of June 28th, 1969, between police and gay activists outside the Stonewall Inn in Greenwich Village in New York City. The demonstrations lasted for days, and it's considered the watershed event that's transformed the gay movement and gay liberation. Tell us about it. Tell us how it impacted you. And, let's just talk a little bit about that.
Mm-hmm. Well, the issues around Stonewall are significant. It was an event that occupied the news waves for several days, both in print publications like the New York Times, the Washington Post, Chicago Tribune, LA Times, and in news media. It was on the national news shows, that sort of stuff. But unfortunately, over time, the event has been whitewashed and queerwashed. The Stonewall Inn was not a bar like we experience them today. It was not out on the street. It was on Christopher Street, but it was not out on the street. It wasn't a luxury place. It wasn't even a place where masculine identified, particularly white gay men, were present. This was a dump. This is where our own sexual gender minorities were. This is a place where people of color were. It was a dump, and like most gay bars of the time, it was mob owned and regularly police raided. People were exploited, and so it was Black and brown, trans people, and other people in socially disparaged groups within our own LGBT community who provided that pushback. And yet, when you see the videos of that time, the newsreels of that time, you see Leatherman, you see particularly white mask identified men out on the streets, but they weren't the people who started it. And it's interesting that the only movie that was made for mass general distribution in the United States about Stonewall made the story about a white gay guy. He was the center of the story. That's as outraging as a movie made about the civil rights movement called Mississippi Burning, and it was built around the story of the FBI. It wasn't about the FBI. It was what was happening to Black people. It wasn't about guys who could pass in general society. This Stonewall was about people who couldn't, people to whom we all in the LGBT community owe respect and allegiance and a thank you. It was about people who could not hide, trans people. It was about sissy gay boys and dykey lesbian women. The people who could not hide, are the people who brought us through. And they had just tolerated enough, and they stood up and they fought back. And it's those people who are still disparaged in our community to whom we owe our thanks.
And man, regarding Stonewall, there's Marsha P Johnson, right? She was the African-American transgender woman, revolutionary LGBTQ activist. And she was credited for being an instigator and having a big role in Stonewall. And even that she's being whitewashed,
Absolutely.
Yeah. However,
Absolutely.
Netflix did. What I was going to say is Netflix did a pretty good documentary about Marsha, I think a few years ago. But now what were you going to say?
Yeah, I agree. And it's important that we continue to work within the LGBT community because we are a community of intent. We are not a naturally occurring community. We are a community that comes together from various communities of origin. And we carry with us the values of those communities of origin. So all of the social disparities that exist within the general community exist within the LGBT community. We have a problem with racism. We have a problem with classism. We have a problem with gender or sex, meaning between men and women. We have a problem in addition with gender expansion. We do. There are older gay men that I interact with regularly who have the nerve to suggest that the transgender community is not a legitimate part of our community. And I'm like, are you kidding? Who do you think brought us through? Who do you think brought us through? As I say, it's the transgender community, the sissy boys, and the dykey girls who couldn't hide what they were all through history that we owe our thanks to.
And what I always say to people is one of the biggest problems that we have is that we don't know our history. We don't know Black history. We don't know LGBTQ history. And too many of us don't even want to take the time to learn our history, because I will always say, if you don't know your history, what has gone on before, how can you really understand what's going on right now? So I don't get that.
Exactly right. Well, it's a challenge. It's an intergenerational challenge. Whatever your community is marginalized around, whether it's sexual orientation or gender identity or race or whatever, we have to see to it that our youngsters know the history and the context of those events in history, because to look back and judge those times by the standards that we have today is to engage in revisionist history. And that is never accurate. Plus, it reduces the importance of different events, and that's very important that we do that. Very important.
Very true, Mr. Bell. Let's move on to aging, particularly within the LGBTQ community. It appears that our community is so youth focused and youth fixated. And you've stated, and I quote, in America, we feel that as people grow older, they grow lesser, end quote. So let's unpack that a little bit.
Absolutely. Well, the LGBT community joins the general community in being ageist. And I can tell you, as the person who spent his entire life with different social disparities, I wasn't the least bit pleased about growing into a new ism. And so I've taken a very strong stand against racism against ageism, is because what it does is, unlike most of the rest of the world, we demean people as they grow older. We dismiss them. We find them of little value, as opposed to most of the world, which reveres people of age. They revere people for survival, for knowledge, for the perspectives that come through the years of lived experience, and you will notice whenever I identify myself, I give my name, I give my pronouns, and then there's always a 73 at the end there. That's because I'm 73 years old. And you know what? My aging represents survival. It represents achievement. It represents getting here when I've left so many along the way getting here. I have survived the Vietnam War. I have survived, lynching was still going on when I was young. I have survived police assault. I have survived attacks because I was a Black person, having to be sure that I was always in the right place so that there was safety in that. I have survived times of conversion camps and lobotomies and things like that happened to gay people. All of these things, and of course, I've survived HIV/AIDS, which, although in the United States is still thought of generally as a gay disease, in fact, the HIV epidemic continues to be a condition of color, impacting Black and brown communities disproportionately, and not just men, but women. HIV/AIDS continues to be the number one cause of death for young Black and brown women between the ages of 25 and 44. And yet their stories are rarely told. So again, there's just so much there. We have to learn this history and the context under which these events happen so that we get a real sense of truth and history. And we have to recognize that there are active components out there that don't want us to have that. As you look at what's happening in state houses across the country now, the bills that are being introduced, the anti-LGBT effort that is outwardly and openly being carried on right now, we still have a long way to go. We still are not safe. Minority people of any description are not safe in this country. And we have to band together in coalition. We have to band together in fighting isms, whether you feel you're directly involved or not, because when one advances, we all advance. A rising tide does, in fact, lift all boats. and we all have direct connection. I'm appreciative of the fact that you mentioned my commitment to pro-feminism. I'm a member of the National Organization for Men Against Sexism, which is the nation's oldest pro-feminist men's organization. And I'm a founding member of that. I've been associated with pro-feminism for over 50 years because in my mind, as a man, and as a Black man, first of all, I had so many different oppressions that I had to deal with that I didn't want to contribute to anybody else's oppression, So as a man, I did not want to participate in women's oppression, and I have to work against that all the time. You don't get there where you can say, hey, I'm over it. It's a constant process because all the isms morph all the time. They change all the time. And so you always have to be on guard. You always have to be open to people who are trusting of you and loving of you, who can give you the feedback that you need to stay on the path toward getting over these things. But both as a Black man and as a man, despite what generally happens in the community, I'm committed to honoring African American women in particular. You know yourself, and any of us who've grown up Black, if you want to start a red hot conversation, then let's talk about the relationships between Black men and Black women. And boy, oh boy, right. But we have to recognize and honor what Black women have done for us. Black women were providers for the Black community when men couldn't be. When men couldn't find jobs, Black women were out there earning money, and they had to do that. They had to be the provider, and then they still came home to be the nurturer, to take care of Black children and Black men. Black women, had to pick the same cotton in the same amounts, the same tobacco, cut the same sugar beets, while being assaulted and being pregnant, carrying babies to term, delivering in the fields, and then having to get back out in those fields that same day. They've been with us every step of the way. They've brought us through. And we don't get, as Black men, we don't get to assert all the harmful elements of masculinity against Black women. We just don't get to do that because we wouldn't be here without them. This country would not be here without them. Go ahead.
So true. What I want to ask you, and thank you for sharing that because that's profound as well. I want to talk about two big ticket items or concerns about LGBTQ older people. First, you've got socialization and isolation, and then you have the need for safe and affordable housing. Why don't you chime in about those two?
Absolutely. I have the privilege, and it truly is a privilege, of living in the Town Hall apartments in Chicago. And Town Hall apartments are Chicago's first and the nation's fourth LGBT senior friendly development. Now, that doesn't mean LGBT exclusively, because we follow the same open rights provisions that we had to fight for. We had to fight to get sexual orientation and gender identity identified in the state of Illinois as a protected class, so that just like you can't discriminate on the basis of race or gender or whatever, you can't discriminate on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity in this state. And so our breakdown in our development is about 30% hetero-identified and 70% LGBT identified. Well, it means that about 65 of us live in a safe place where we do not have to go back into the closet, where it is safe to be who we are, to interact as we interact, to have open conversations about what we see, what we feel, what we think, without retribution of losing the place where we live. And that's not true for a lot of people. And so the 65 of us have what about 54,000 LGBT elders in the Chicago metropolitan area do not have. And that is a safe and accepting and culturally reinforcing environment to live in. And so what happens to those other 54,000, even though Illinois is a state where LGBT people enjoy full civil rights and is one of the few states in the country where we enjoy full civil rights, we still have a cultural impact of not feeling safe in general spaces. And we still are forced back into the closet when we're seeking housing and when we're seeking other services like healthcare, whatever things that we need. There still is not safety throughout the world, throughout the United States, and even in oasis places like Chicago and in blue states like Illinois, to be who you are in all places. And in order to get what you need because you're aging, you oftentimes have to go back into the closet. And going back into the closet basically means you have to deny the reality of who you are. And I'm sure that for members of your audience, no matter how they think of themselves, if they thought that they would have to hide that or disclaim that to do any of the regular things that they do in the world, then that is what LGBT elders still experience. And that Donald, is detrimental to our health and to our lives. Go ahead.
Got it. My friend, before we sign off, tell us a little bit about, I believe it's called the One Roof. It's called One Roof Chicago, the initiative that you're involved in.
Absolutely. We are so proud of this. What we are doing is working together to develop an intergenerational LGBT-friendly housing space on the south side of Chicago. And that's important because we will be addressing not only the issue of sexual orientation and gender identity in an aging community, but we also will be tying the links between our generations. We are tied to our youth is tied to us, and that's important. And that's what we oftentimes miss in our community. And the need for housing is there for both communities. We have a percentage of like 60% of homeless youth in our city are LGBT identified because there are not places for them. They're not welcoming places for them. They are estranged from their families of origin and their communities of origin, which is the same thing that has happened to most of us. And so that need for intergenerational connection, which is normal in human society, is missing for us in our society. But we can come together and be families of choice and communities of choice, and we can meet the needs, the intergenerational needs of both communities. For us who are aging, we need a sense of legacy. We need a connection. Younger people not only keep us involved in today, but they are the people to whom we get to pass along our legacy, the meaning of our lives, what we have lived for, what we hope for. That's human, Younger people get to learn from our experience. They get to learn how to negotiate the realities of society, how to get to be what they want to be without being limited by their sexual orientation and gender identity. And so if we can bring these two communities together, it will be a transformational experience, because as wonderful as town hall is, it only does part of the job. But we want to have a senior residence where seniors go from independent living, like we have here in town hall, to assisted living, and then to palliative care and hospice. So they only have to move once, and they know that they can live safely until they die. And for youth,
got it.
We have a place where they can be embraced and emotionally and socially reinforced. You know, growing up not feeling devalued, but feeling valued, feeling that they have potential and that there are people who care about them. They're not alone in the world in their tender years like they experience now. And the reality is there should be someplace better than the red line for kids to sleep in at night. So they have a place where they can put their stuff and come back to, and it'll all be there. So that's what we're trying to do. And that's One Roof Chicago.
Last question for you in just a few words, and here it is. Give us one best thing about getting older.
Perspective. Getting older provides perspective. When we are young and we assess what's going on in the world, we tend to come to conclusions of black and white. You know, you're with us or you're against us. You know, but when you get older, you develop more and more senses of gray, where you can understand where people come to, even if they disagree with you. You can understand why they behave the way they do, even though you find that behavior abhorrent. And all of that is essential so that human beings can negotiate their way through a lifetime of human experience. You know, while we have tremendous diversity within the human species, basically we are all the same being. There's less than 10% of there's less than 1/10 of 1% difference in us in terms of DNA. You know, but we perceive difference because we are human, and it's because of that perceived difference that we have to negotiate our way through things. We all only got one planet. And we got to take care of that planet, and we can't kick that down the road anymore. But the process of taking care of the planet leads through being better human beings together, accepting humanity in all of its combinations and permutations, including what we classify as race and what we classify as sexual orientation and gender identity. But all of it is connected because human experience is a flowing continuum. It's not a set of silos.
Got it. Thank you, sir. Now, look, before we sign off, how can we connect with you, follow you, give us all of your social media?
Okay. Well, yes. I'm on Facebook and Instagram and all of that stuff. And you can reach out to any of my organizations, nomos.org, pridenet.org, oneroofchicago.org, thevillagechicago.org. I'm a .org guy.
Good God. Look.
So, yeah.
Give us those websites again, please.
Okay. Pridenet.org. Okay. Thevillagechicago.org. Jane Addams Senior Caucus.org. And I'm forgetting some. I'm just org. Oh, oneroofchicago.org. How could I forget that? And yeah, I'm there. and nomas.org. And we welcome people to come and view our websites and to support us in our efforts. And we look for connection and coalition. So we too actively want to support people who are being progressive in the efforts that they are making too. So we're all in this together.
Yes, we are. And Mr. Donald M. Bell, thank you for stopping by. Wyatt, I've got to have you back.
Thank you so much. You made an old guy feel right at home. Thank you.
That was the plan. Thank you so much. So there you have it. You can find the official Wyatt podcast page at WyattEvans.com, the go-to destination for LGBTQ plus news, features, commentary, and entertainment. WyattEvans.com is visited by over 100 countries on the regular. I say to that, hey baby. And at WyattEvans.com, you'll find my smoking hot, HAWT hot, Nothing Can Tear Us Apart series of novels. The current installment is Frenzy! Yeah, Frenzy. And its predecessor is Rage. And y'all look, in April, the much anticipated sequel in the Nothing Can Tear Us Apart series of novels drops. It's called Shattered. I said Shattered. Yeah, and it's gonna have all the hotness, all the intrigue, all the action, all the, twists and turns that you're used to in the Nothing Can Tear Us Apart series of novels. Now, you can follow me, your host, Wyatt O'Brien Evans. Drop me a line at WyattOnAir@gmail.com. And I'm on Twitter. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Facebook. All of my social media is right there for you to peruse. Yeah. So look. Just look. Until next time, y'all. Woof, goddammit, woof, woof, woof. Arf!